In this video, I want to show you guys a share. Thank you, Rodney, for sharing this with me, because it just pounds home how simple yet complex our reality really is. This is a huge clue as to how the structure of our existence is created, both through the thought process, I believe, and the twixt forces of creation and man.
And had mastered them, maybe. I don't know. I never really thought about that. But, I'm also thinking, we have graduated up from using simply string to, where we use lasers now. We have a laser instrument that we will use that we can, do all of our layout with. We'll use our laser to level things and to sight things and line things up precisely. So I'm thinking that if I was going to attempt that, so maybe if there's anybody out there that wants to fund a research project, we could see what we could pull off. I don't know. Maybe so. Clearly, if somebody is actually doing it, though, they certainly know some geometry.
They do, and this is the trippy thing. They're not using lasers. They're not even using flashlights, or they would be seen. I can imagine a Hollywood production with floodlights and light-alls and 30, 40 people and but no, that's not what's going on. Otherwise, we would see it and it'd be on videotape and it would be story over. Right? That's it. Close the book on that. All right, let's go to probably the most famous image on everything that you said, which is image number 8, the Masonic logo, the square and the compass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know it's fundamental, but take us through this.
Well, it is fundamental. It's the two instruments of geometry, and you've got a compass set at 60 degrees, and then you have the square, which is the right angle of 90 degrees. And in the fundamental operation of sacred geometry, which is the creation of the Vesica, which is the overlap of two circles, which if we have time to get into a few more images, we'll see that. You can basically generate both the equilateral triangle and the square. And in the previous image that we were looking at, the Zen calligraphy, I might mention that it's read from right to left. So the circle is the most fundamental form, then the equilateral triangle follows from that, and then a rectilinear form, which is the more complex form, follows from that. So it kind of, the pattern of the Zen calligraphy mimics sort of the process of creation and the process of geometry, whereby you start with the simplest form, which is a circle, which is a circumference in a center, and from that you can get an equilateral triangle. And the reason is that by whatever coincidence of reality, it just so happens that the radius of a circle will exactly step off the circumference 6 times. So the division of anybody who is able to draw a circle by means of a compass, and you could make a compass very simply, just like in some of the previous images, by essentially just the compasses that we sell or that we include with the sacred geometry class are basically 2 pieces of wood held together with a clip. And it's a relatively simple affair, but it's very effective. And again, you can use a piece of string with a stake in the ground. But the idea is that if you draw a circle, anybody could then further experimenting or playing with it could discover that, if you step off the radius of that circle, start at any point on the circumference, and walk it around, it'll exactly step off the circumference 6 times, producing a hexagon. And from that hexagon, now if you begin to connect, if you connect one point, skip a point to the next point, skip a point to the next one, and then go back to the original point, you'll have an equilateral triangle. If you do that again, you'll have the hexagram, which is the 6-pointed star,
right,
which is, the
star
symbol of Judaism.
Right.
Yeah. And so here in this particular figure, basically what you've got is the compass with which you can draw the circles, and you've got and it's set at 60 degrees, which is the equilateral triangle, and then you've got the 90-degree square. But in the philosophy of sacred geometry, the ultimate act of geometry is the reconciliation of square and circle. It's called the squaring of the circle, right? And because based upon the mathematics, you can have an exact measurement for one, but not the other. In other words, and generally a square is considered an emblem of rationality and anything that is finite and measurable because of the fact that the very rational relationship between the sides of a square and its perimeter. Whereas with the circle, you don't have this rational relationship. You could express the circumference as a whole number, but then the diameter is not a whole number, or vice versa. Usually you take the diameter, if you take the diameter as one unit, which is the unit circle, then the circumference is going to have the value of pi, which is a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal number, which we call an irrational number. And the previous numbers that we talked about, like the square root of 2, that defined that the painting of God,
Okay, guys, I wanted to reiterate what I was talking about here. This is the Vortex math principle Mirko Rodin does, or figured out. This is essentially the creative manifest of our self-consciousness and how it regenerates our existence, I believe. Okay, we got 1 right here, 2 on that corner, 3 comes down off of the compass, 4, 5, and out of this Vortex math principle, obviously you can create the Star of David. You can create all of them, all of the geometric shapes, just like Randall was just talking about squaring the circle. You know, the definition of the finite encompassing the infinite, which Phil has talked about. 6, and we already know this is going to be 9, because 3 and 6 equal 9. And then as it pulses up here, it switches. The 3 and the 6 switch, so 3 would come over here, 6 over there. Okay, forget that for now. So we'll put 8 here, 7 here. Okay, now the doubling effect, the seed analogy, the way reproduction works. Okay, 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 8 is 16. So, and then you have to remember, you got to go to the digital root. So 1 plus 6 is 7. 7 plus 7 is 14. So 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. So 1 plus 0 is 10. Or 1 plus 0 is 1. So you're back to the start. And then just keep on going. Now you could double these numbers and still do it. So like if you were to just replace the numbers with the doubling, and it'll just keep going exponentially, infinitely. So how I see this equation, this Vortex math principle, is all numbers besides 3, 6, and 9 are the manifestation of matter or mass in an infinite sea or potentiality of the ether, or the chaos, or the akasa that flows through us all. And the akasa is what is said in the Hermetic idiom that it is the antithesis, or the reason. All biological mass is animate. It's from the akasa. It works inside of us and outside of us, both external and internal, both cosmologically and internally. And I believe this is the relationship, in a modern sense, of the marrying the mathematical to the energetical or the spiritual. Now that's just me. I'm not an expert on this yet, but this is how I see it. And the big G could stand for geometry, it could stand for God, it could stand for gnosis. And there's several other images I'll share with you at some later point. But this opens doors that you would not believe if you can get your mind around. So this pumps up this way, and the arrow always goes to the double, So you're going this way for the double. And you could go either way, you know what I mean? So let's say we start at 8, and we want to go back to 4. You'd have to subtract itself from itself. You know what I mean? Well, maybe that's not right. I don't know. But you get what I mean. The compass is the 369 that Tesla talked about. 369, staying in line. I'll suck it to you one more time. Get low. So 6, 3, 9. So as this pulsates, it goes boom, boom, down to the 3, 6. 3 plus 6 is 9. Comes back up, turns to 9. Then this switches over here to 3. This switches to 6. 9. 9. And it's 9 on both ends. 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. That's why 9 is the creative force of all in mathematical terms. 333. That is me.
Out the universe with the compass.
Right.
That is also an irrational number. It starts out 1.4142, 13562, but then it goes on forever. And so anybody using it will have to basically round off at some point, just like you round off pi, usually to 1.314. If you're.
And the same thing he's talking about is just what I talked about in a different sense. That is how I'm starting to realize that creation is on multi-levels, or just endless thought, endless potentiality. I mean, it's just crazy, and it's the fractalized universe of creation.
Use pi. But the interesting thing, though, about the irrational numbers is that even though when you try to express them mathematically, you cannot set them up as a fraction. You can't set the diameter of a circle and then the circumference of a circle in a fraction, numerator and denominator.
Okay, now I just wanted to show you one more thing. You take a circle, not a good circle. Okay, you split it, you get 180. Split it again, you get 90. Split it again, you get 45. On and on and on. But you notice every number, every time you bisect a circle, 22.5. Every time, all the numbers always add up to 9. Always. And then this fills up. And from the center, it grows. And it gets blacker and 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 blacker until it fills the whole circle. And then you're, that's the infinite. Now the finite is expressed in the Platonic solids, which is the geometric form produced by the Vesica initially, but with the square and the circle. Think of the square as the male, and think of the compass as the female, or vice versa. I mean, think of the square as the female and the compass as a male. It doesn't matter. But that's the twixt forces, the in-between forces that create. I don't know why I keep saying twixt, but
in geometry, you can actually get the exact relationships, even though you can't or as close as you can draw, but you can't express them mathematics. They're irreconcilable mathematically. In other words, irrational. And so what we have here in this is the reconciliation of square square, and compass, which is the squaring of the circle, which is sort of the hidden meaning of this particular image here. And the squaring of the circle, again, represented the ultimate reconciliation of opposing forces in the universe. So measurable versus immeasurable,
Right.
Finite versus infinite, rational versus irrational, those concepts like that. So the circle was usually considered to be a symbol of the heavens. The square was taken to be a symbol of the earth. In the reconciliation of the opposing forces of circle and square, it also represented the summum bonum of the alchemical operation, which was the linking of heaven and earth, which is the basic axiom of alchemy, which is as above, so below.
Let's get to let's get to the Vesica before we start to run out of time.
Remember diamonds.
I'm here. Very important image.
Yeah, the next figure shows an elaboration of the Vesica, which if you look carefully, you'll see that there's two circles overlapping, and they overlap in such a way that the circumference of one falls on the center of the other. And anybody could draw this. You know, this wouldn't take an advanced technology. All it would take would be, like we talked about, a stake and some string. So you basically draw one circle, and then you move your center of your compass or your stake or whatever to the circumference of that first circle you drew, and then you draw a second circle of the same exact diameter. And then it's the overlap of those two circles that forms the Vesica, which basically means a vessel. And the Vesica was considered to be a feminine symbol, and it was often associated with the vagina and with the womb. And it's interesting because it's out of the Vesica that emerges the full, all the generations of geometry emerge from the Vesica. All the complex forms come out of that Vesica, starting with the equilateral triangle, then moving to the square, then moving to the pentagon, then the hexagon,
The platonic solids.
seven-sided, the nonagon, the octagon. All of these can be generated starting with the fundamental form of the Vesica.
I remember back in art school as well, when we were looking at the Vesica, that all design, everything can come from a Vesica. And I remember one of my art teachers saying, a car could not be designed without the Vesica. Everything that you see is represented here. And it's a mind-blowing concept, but then when you start to look at it, it can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and everything is represented right here.
Yes, that would be an accurate interpretation of it, absolutely. And so that overlap, that's the Vesica, it's the vessel. Interestingly, it has sort of also a ship-like form to it. And when a lot of the Gothic cathedrals are based upon the proportion of a Vesica. Chartres is a...
Did you hear what he just said? A ship. A ship. Remember what Phil was saying about how the boat is a depiction of the light in all Divine Union alchemical renditions or versions, and that's what the light looks like, is a boat, with the oars sticking out.
Prime example where the length to width ratio of the cathedral is the same as the length to width ratio of the Vesica, which, by the way, happens to be the square root of 3. So if you look at this figure that we've got up here, the long vertical axis, let's say this, if the horizontal axis is 1, then the long vertical axis is the square root of 3, the irrational number, the square root of 3. And since all of science derives from mathematics, and all of mathematics derives from geometry, and all of geometry derives from the Vesica, you can see that, yes, your art instructor was absolutely correct in saying that it all starts with this figure right here.
That's right. It's so important. And now let's go to, which is really cool, let's go to image number 10, the cover of the chalice well, because what are we looking at here?
Well, here we see it. This was designed by Bly Bond in the early 20th century, who had studied deeply into the mysteries of alchemy and the Holy Grail. And of course, Glastonbury is associated with the Grail traditions. And so this is a very suitable form to be on the lid to the sacred well. And again, going back to our discussion about the idea of water being associated with these sacred sites, Glastonbury Abbey was built over a site of underground water, which emerged at the surface at this well. And this was the cover of the well, of the chalice well. And traditionally it had always been called the chalice well. And in this case, the chalice being referenced is none other than the Holy Grail, which was this figure, which was this image that we've got from these medieval romances written in the late 11 and early 1200s, referring back to earlier events, and full of very interesting imagery, very potent stuff. And I mean, we could devote a whole discussion just to the Grail imagery. A lot of overlap between the Grail stories and the traditions of alchemy and Hermeticism. Lots of parallels there. But basically the idea in the Grail stories was that the land had fallen into waste. The fertile kingdom had become a wasteland at the same time that the king had become debilitated and incapacitated. And the Grail was the secret to restoring not only the health of the king, but restoring the wasteland, restoring the land to fertility and fecundity. And I have strongly believed for a long time now that the Grail symbolism represents this, what we might think of as a lost technology for the restoration of a landscape devastated in the wake of a catastrophe, to accelerate the recovery of that landscape by utilizing these subtle forces that are also now demonstrated empirically to have a relationship to biological activity.
Did you hear that, guys? Did you freaking hear that? So, the divine union. Do you hear this? I am beside myself right now. I have goosebumps going, pulsating up and down my body right now. That is so incredibly significant, what he just said. Marry that with what we've been learning recently from Phil. That well is the... This is incredible. The well is within us, guys. And the key to regeneration is within us. What we've been talking about. The divine union, the great work. The alchemical wedding. One and the same. All the same. All the same, guys. But, yeah. Crazy.
And this could be a whole other discussion we could have sometime. But I think if we move, let's see, what's the next image?
Yeah. Actually, I just want to, I'm going to thank Cameron out of the gate here for actually getting his job done. Well done, Cameron. It's all out there now. He's obviously listening. It's very cool. Okay. The next image, and we've got about 7 minutes to the bottom of the hour. The next image, Buddha. Okay, let's go right here.
Well, here's Buddha seated within the Vesica. And this has parallels with the Christian tradition because, as we're going to see, I think the sequence of images got a little out of order, but if we move through them, we'll be able to see, because in many of the facades of the cathedrals, Jesus is always depicted seated within a Vesica. And it basically conveys the same ideas that we see right here with Buddha seated within the Vesica. The idea that the teacher, the master, see, because in another way, even as the womb is considered to be a doorway or an aperture between two dimensions of being or existence, so is the Vesica. It's also thought of as a doorway or an aperture between worlds. And so the fact that Buddha or Christ is seated within the gateway, within the aperture between these worlds, is highly significant.
Now,
But do you see what's underneath him? It's the pine cone. You see the scales. And look at the Vesica is shaped as a pine cone. That's incredible. This is freaking incredible. We're marrying two different idioms or ideological or ideas. The path that we've been learning recently, those who have been following Phil closely with me, has talked about how we are the beginning and the end. We are the 1 and the 13. We are the spark at the tail and the mouth of the Ouroboros. Right here. These scales represent the pine cone. Isn't that incredible? And also, this represents the seed and the vagina. And you see what's around his head? And in the middle of his forehead. It's got the scales on his head, too. Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Phil.
Oh, yeah. Let's jump over. Well, we're going to come back to the cathedral with the arches because I want to jump to the Vesica with the pyramid. And what's interesting here, Rita, this is I think this is image 13. Is this the ratio of the Great Pyramid? Just tell me now. Blow my mind.
Yes, it is.
Oh man. Okay, take us through this. This is absolutely mind-blowing because it looks perfect. It is, isn't it?
Well, there's yes and no. I mean, it's so close that if you were to use this to lay out a structure, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the idealized structure based upon this pattern and the actual structure sitting on the Giza Plateau.
Now, what's the degree that I'm looking at here? What are the degrees on the sides of this pyramid?
51.6.
Well, it's very close to 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 51.8.
Wow.
Roughly. It's very, very, very close. And this, you can see that it's actually, you start with the Vesica. You can see the overlap of the two circles. You see the rhombus within the inner Vesica that has the root 3 dimensions. And then the two circles that, let's say this, Jimmy, we establish the inner Vesica has a width of 1 unit. Now we can see that the two circles forming that are 3 times that, so it's 3 units in width. And then we have a large outer Vesica enclosing that. We then use the height of the inner Vesica, and we erect a perpendicular at one end, in this case at the bottom end of the rhombus, and we extend that base out until it intersects the outer arcs of the large Vesica. And then, as you can see, we construct those lines back to the other end of the rhombus.
It's an eyeball. It's a seed. I mean, you see the eye, right? There's the eye. There's a pupil. Ain't that incredible? Stare into the mirror, into your eyes for 10 minutes once, guys. Seriously, with no noise.
Top point of the Vesica, and that gives us the profile of the Great Pyramid.
Beyond coincidence?
Yeah, I don't know if I would dismiss this as coincidence. But there's actually several geometric ways of deriving that cross-section of the Great Pyramid, which to me is really very interesting. And we don't have time, or I didn't provide the imagery to examine some of the other ways. But again, what this does show is this Vesica as the vessel, or the womb out of which all of this form can be generated. And here we see as an example, I included this because it is an example of even the profile of the Great Pyramid can be generated out of it.
Well, now this is, Are we? What made you? What's your determination of how they came up with the angles for the Great Pyramid? Did they generate it through geometry like this, or did they do it out of necessity to keep that thing from falling over?
Oh, well, I think, interestingly, the angle is very structurally stable. But, yeah, I think it's just loaded with geometric symbolism, and I think that was the intent, to show that here is a structure that encodes the relationship of pi, it encodes the relationship of phi, or the golden section. Because if you look at this diagram right here, let's go over to the right base of the pyramid, where that angle meets the outer arc. If we follow that diagonal line up to the apex of the pyramid, and then we follow it along the base until it meets the middle vertical axis. That long side is to that half the base in the golden section relationship. So there it is right there.
Right.
So we've not only included the square root of 3, we've also now included the golden section within one diagram here.
Yeah, and
did you see the numbers I just did? So that encoded within the Great Pyramid is the relationship between the one, the infinite. That's why it's considered, the Great Pyramid is considered Earth force, or that's why all of the elements are shaped as triangles. You know, the alchemical elements are earth, wind, fire, and water, and they're depicted as triangles, you know, and that's Earth force.
again, I can't. You may say, Randall, that's fine. String, stake. You're able to do this. This is just simple stuff with objects and triangles and arches and squares, and they were able to do this, with a creative process back then. I look at this and I see high technology, high intelligence. I don't see anybody drawing this stuff out in the sand and coming up with something that looks cool. No, I think this is way beyond that. I really do. I consider this non-Euclidean geometry of, high intelligence.
Which makes me wonder, is Randall enlightened? Has he made the divine union? Or is it because he's stuck on the physical side of things so much that he's concentrating on just the physicality of our reality instead of going into the spiritual? He has to have gone into the spiritual, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, because, see, you can take this the next step. What we're looking at here, in a sense, Jimmy, is like a two-dimensional cross-section. You have to picture that you can also understand these circles as being spheres.
Yes.
And that these two spheres are intersecting in this same geometric relationship, and so therefore...
The MasterCard symbol, as Runky Monkey would say, Jerry.
Rhombus that is formed within the Vesica is now a three-dimensional form.
Diamond.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm open to on the one hand, you could do it with very simple technological means, but within it, though, is this very sophisticated knowledge of geometry and astronomy and possibly, like we were talking about earlier, geology. And what strikes me as I read through the various myths from many cultures, many lands, many times, one of the consistent themes is the idea of these outsiders who came in with this advanced knowledge and taught this knowledge to these various cultures. I mean, whether you're talking about the Babylonians or the Egyptians or the
outside force, you guys, is the Akashic record, or the God, us as a whole. Think about that now. The one is everybody. The many is everybody. The one is God, which is the many, which is the one, which is the many, which is God. Like the story I told about how when I put my dog down, She looked at me with the same eyes, the same look in her eyes as my dad did when he died. Right before he died. By the way, both were pretty much laid to rest via pharmaceuticals or man-made way. And not natural. Because my dad had his last shot of dopamine, you know, and I don't care what anybody says, but that's the hospital's way of saying they're euthanizing him for a humane way or humane purpose. You know, when your organs start failing and you're in ICU and they know you're going to die and it's inevitable, they keep you in a dopamine coma. They use that both for healing and for the end. I will never put another animal I own down ever again. And I don't own my animal. I love my dogs. I love my bird. I love everything. I will never kill another deer. Now, back to my point. They looked at me with the same eyes. This is how I know in my heart of hearts that the energy that is within us all is God. The Akasa. The energy of life. Now, what creates that is the self-cognizant understanding or consciousness of what we are and how this works. And today I've made a huge leap in that knowledge. And I got to thank Rodney for it. For sharing this. I've been familiar, but it's amazing how things have been working. But do you see the diamonds in this, guys? You see the diamond over and over again. Do you see it? Come on, tell me you see it. Do you see it? I see it. The diamond. Right? Do you see the other diamond? Diamond, 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 diamond. Diamond. See it? Diamond. Now, what happens? What are we? What are pyramids? Pyramids are diamonds in a field of clay. We are diamonds in a sea of clay.
Celts or Native Americans or the Mayans, the Chinese, they've all got this idea of whatever you want to think of them as the gods or whatever, who had some kind of knowledge and were able to impart this knowledge. And,
And I just made another correlation. What if that's what Phil is? So if we're to write stories and we're to accomplish our goal as to bringing the two, marrying the two, bringing the two together under the umbrella of one, you know? Make the two one again. Is that not what Phil would be? As one of these gods with the pollen bag and the seed.
All of this stuff that we see, this legacy of these ancient cultures, is what we inherited from that connection. Whatever that connection is. Excuse me, a dog just walked by and stepped on my foot.
That's okay. Well, actually, we just blew past our last commercial break. Let's do. Let's take. I'm going to just hand this off to you because you explain it so well.
Well, this represents the zodiacal wheel, and the numbers are precessional numbers, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. In most interpretations of it, there are some alternate interpretations we could get into, but that would be pretty complicated, especially without having access to imagery. But basically, the idea is that the current rate of precessional motion has been measured at just slightly above 50 arc seconds per year, which translates into a number slightly less than 25,920, but 25,920 has been a traditional number associated with the great year concept. And, you can haggle over, a few years one way or another, but it's the same idea that, you have an idealized archetypal pattern, which, as a designer and builder, I think of that as the blueprint, and then you've got the real-world manifestation of that archetypal pattern. And just like any architect can design a building with high degree of precision, once it's executed, there are going to be small discrepancies that crop up, and then especially through the passage of time, those discrepancies can magnify, so that if you go out and you make accurate measurements or accurate surveys of existing ancient structures, you can infer what their intent was geometrically or metrologically, that is, in terms of what units of measurement they were using. For example, if you had a builder from Europe using the metric system and built a house, and next to it you had an American builder build a house using feet and inches, virtually anybody could go out there with measuring rules and figure out which was which, right?
Right.
This was built with the metric system, this was built with feet and inches. Well, the idea here is that, you've got these numbers that quite accurately define the transition of the vernal equinox through the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, I said 12 signs, not the 12 constellations, because the constellations themselves vary in size, but they have been idealized into this circle divided into 12, which is a really fundamental operation of sacred geometry. It's one of the things that we do in our in our classes, as a person learns how to lay out this 12-fold figure and then begin to encode astronomical information in it, such as we have done here. But the idea is that when you look at these numbers represent intervals of time, right? But when you start looking at the numbers, they also represent spatial measurements as well. So, for example, if we go and we look at roughly what would be about 1 o'clock, if this thing was a clock, you see the number 2,160. And BP means years before present, okay? Now, in geometry, we have the 5 regular polyhedra, which are basically three-dimensional forms that have all of the faces composed of the same polygons. So you can have a tetrahedron, which is composed of 4 equilateral triangles. You can have a cube, which is composed of 6 squares, right? You can have an icosahedron, a dodecahedron, an octahedron, which is composed of 8 equilateral triangles. Well, the idea here is that when you measure space, the system that has come down to us is the sexagesimal system, which basically incorporates a base 6 and a base 10. And there's a logic to this in that, all circles are universally divided into 360 degrees, aren't they?
That's right.
The reason for that is that it goes back to this thing we talked about earlier, where the radius of a circle exactly steps off the circumference 6 times. So what they have done is they have unified the 6-fold division with the 10-fold division and come up, 6 times 10 is 60. And then 6 times 60 is 360. 360 has a whole lot of prime factors. It for a number that is relatively workable in size, it has the greatest number of prime factors. And so what that means is that any circle divided into 360, you can subdivide that into slices of pie with nothing left over. So, for example, 360, you can divide 2 into it, 3, 4, 5, 6, not 7, but 8, 9, 10, not 11, but 12, and so on. And so you've got a high number of these factors which allow you to subdivide this circle into a lot of different useful subsections, right? So the 12-fold is one that follows very logically and almost organically from this 6-fold division of the circumference of a circle.
12 is 144.
And the ancients divided the wheel of the zodiac into 12 equal pie slices, and then they named each of those slices after the constellation that occupied that slice at that time, right?
Right.
So now, going back to this 2,160 BP, what that does is falls on the cusp of Aries and Pisces, right? So if we go back 2,160 years ago, basically the vernal equinox was poised between Aries and Pisces. We come forward 2,160 years, now it's poised between Pisces and Aquarius. But going back to the polyhedra, if you take the cube and using the sexagesimal system that goes back at least to the ancient Babylonians and probably much earlier, what happens is let's think about this. You've got a solid, which is a cube. Each face of the cube is a square. Each square has 4 right angle corners of 90 degrees. If you take the 6 face, the 90 degrees times 4, right? Mm-hmm. Think about that. 90 degrees times 4 is going to give you 360 degrees per face. Then there's 6 faces, so the total number of degrees that measures the cube is 2,160 degrees.
Now, stop right there. Stop right there. That is not only what you come up with the 6 faces of the cube, but now we are dividing up the precession of the equinox into time, and you are able to then, based off starting with the cube, each one of these numbers represented on the 12 points is actually a number that can be equated back into some geometric form. Now, how is that possible? Are we talking about, is this religious? You know, where is this coming from? Because it all interconnects. Time, space, geometry, the zodiac, the precession of the equinox.
Wow.
Randall, this is
because the divine union, when you marry the two, the finite and the infinite, oh my God. When you marry the two, you realize that it's all one. No time. Timeless. Dimensions. No dimensions. Dimensionless. All existent at once. That is the ultimate marrying of the two. That is the ultimate doubling.
This is a mind-blowing concept.
Yes, it is. But, we're just really getting started, Jimmy.
It freaks me out. It freaks me out. It completely freaks me out that these kind of numbers are so magical, and how they fit linear, they fit 3D into time and space, but they also go back to the precession and the wobble of our planet over a 26,000 year period. It's almost too much to comprehend.
Well, to come down to the cusp of Gemini Taurus, where you see the number 6,480 years before present.
Right.
Plato said that the symbol of the universe was a dodecahedron, interestingly. Now, a dodecahedron is 12 faces, and each face is pentagonal, right?
Right.
Now, you have 5 corners in the pentagon, and the angle between each...
So why is there Ophiuchus now? Why is there the 13? Ask yourselves that, guys. Randall made this back in this Jimmy Church, and this interview was in 2017. Since then, all of a sudden there's a 13th sign, guys. Remember, there's 13 steps in every staircase, every level. Why is that?
Pair of edges is 108 degrees. So if you multiply 108 times 5, you're going to get 540 degrees measures each face of the pentagon. Not pentagon, the dodecahedron. Now, you've got 12 pentagonal faces, each of 540 degrees, which comprises the entire dodecahedron. So you multiply the 540 by 12, and what do you get? You get 6,480 degrees is the measure of the dodecahedron. And so it goes. I mean,
right.
The whole thing, and basically, when you take the measures of the 5 regular polyhedra, what you discover is by various combinations of the polyhedra, you can generate all the numbers on this wheel. So, interestingly, the same set of numbers links the measure of time and the measure of space.
Right.
And that, to me, is really one of the most profound things that comes out of the study of sacred geometry. But what's more, Jimmy, is that, we promised we weren't going to talk about this tonight, but I've got to mention it because we talked about it so much before.
Sure.
The Younger Dryas, right?
Right.
Do you recall the date for the onset of the Younger Dryas?
No, but you're going to tell me right now.
Well, in all of the scientific literature, it's usually given as 12,900 plus or minus 100 years.
Right.
Which puts it precisely on the opposite side of the wheel from us at the cusp there of
25,
Virgo,
9,
Leo.
20. Yes. And again, is this just because this is the universe, right? And numbers and geometry and space and time.
It's telling us that there's cycles. There's cycles in everything. Cycles within the cycles. We are the what do I want to call us? We are the microcosm, yet the macrocosm. We are the beginning and the end of the cycle. You understand what I mean by that? Meaning that we see ourselves as some little tiny speck in this great expanse of everything. Yet, we are the great expanse of everything. And the everything is a speck within us. We are the center of all things. The allspark resides in our forehead, right between our temples. The third, the three, the squared 3. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. 2 plus 7 is 9.
Have to be related and interconnect?
Yeah, I would have to fall back on some kind of an explanation like that because, for me, I look at it, it's a mystery.
Right.
St. Augustine said numbers are the thoughts of God. Galileo said mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. Johannes Kepler said geometry existed before the creation. It is co-eternal with the mind of God.
Right.
Geometry provided God with a model for the creation. That was Johannes Kepler. And of course, Plato allowed no one into his academy as is well known, inscribed over the entrance to his academy. He said, "Let none enter here who are ignorant of geometry."
Did you ever try to find fault in this? Did you try to find some type of a geometric enclosure and make the math wrong, or does it all fit?
No, I haven't been able to discredit it. It's there. It's one of those things, and it's there. The measurements are there. The numbers are there. They come from independent sources. Really, the only way you can not deal with this is to declare it a coincidence and then just forget about it.
Yeah, Michael Shermer. So I had to do it. That's 3 Michael Shermers in one show. But see, this is the thing. Anybody can do it. Anybody can go and take some multi-sided geometric form, measure the angles, or count the sides, and multiply. You're going to come up with a number that is going to match on this wheel.
Not only that, guys, the numbers match with the the 7 that are the octaves of the solfeggio, the visual light spectrum, which is the pixelization of our and the pixels of our TVs. I mean, they match. They skipped the 7 for some reason, because I think that's the key and the way. The Hermetic principles are the loop of creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the skeptics that I've encountered have basically said, well, it is all coincidence, and if you use numbers other than 360 degrees of a circle, but the point is that the 360 degrees of a circle is not arbitrary. It's something that comes out of the logic of geometry. It's a number that could come up independently numerous times by people studying these things and going, okay, this is what makes sense. Because, like I said, it goes back to the idea.
Anybody who's followed this video has got to realize how huge it is, how far-reaching this, what we're talking about here, what Randall has presented, what Jimmy Church has presented on his radio show, and what the prevailing question in my mind right now is, so 360 is everything. Where did the extra 5 days come from? What's the deal with the extra 5 days in our calendar? From what I've understood and from my studies, I found that in ancient days, they say that the calendar was 360 days a year, which would be right in line, harmony with nature. 9. Where did the extra 5 days come from?
This simple geometric idea of the relationship between a circle's radius and its circumference. And it goes so much further than what we've just looked at here. I mean, we're just looking at page 1 here of a multi-volume set.
Right. And then this, the coup d'etat, the closer on this is the fact that we have the great year of 25,920. I just can't wrap my head around it. The numbers are the numbers. The great year, the precession of the equinox is what it is, but they are one and the same here, and they lock down lockstep.
9.
Well, they do, and that's, to me, what's really, really interesting. And, there's so much to this that we could get into. Basically, when I look at, for example, the world, I look at the solar system, I look at the larger system that it's part of, I can't help it. I see design. I see architecture. I see a teleological matrix, if you will, to the universe. The way things have come together are just extraordinary. And, God, I mean, there's so much we could get into, Jimmy, but, I'm thinking back to this study that came out in the late 90s. There was a study looking at how comets were delivered to the inner solar system, right?
Right,
and it turns out that comets are fundamental, that comets are probably contain the raw materials for the creation of life.
I ascertain or postulate that the comets in the physical and the cosmic are the same as the light within man. You understand what I mean by that? Randall's going to go on to explain that it's the elements that have been delivered to Earth through the comets. So in both symbolic terms that we see, in like the Holy Grail story, like the Atlantean story, like Noah's Ark story, like the Exodus story, like all stories. Adam and Eve, on down the line. Even to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The three little bears, or the three bears. Goldilocks, or whatever. You understand what I mean? All of it tells us we must look within us, not look within us, work within us to unify the outside and the inside. Is this why our weather on our planet right now goes from super cold to super hot? And it's only going to get worse? Or better? For that matter? Now that's a layman's way of saying, wake up. Go to sleep within. Blow up the outside world.
When you have a terrestrial matrix that is suitable, you introduce the seeds of life, and the agency whereby you introduce those seeds is comets. Comets not only introduce life, they can destroy life. What happened 12,900 years ago was most likely Earth encountering a fragmenting comet, right? And this ties us back to concepts of the Grail and exobiology and a whole lot of really interesting, juicy stuff we can talk about. But what I'm getting at to here is that when a group of scientists were looking at the the proportions of the solar system and looking at how comets could be delivered from their zone in the outer solar system in the Kuiper disk to become Earth crossing, where they could deliver their cargo of volatiles and exotic materials to the terrestrial biosphere. It turns out that the 4 large outer planets are critical for bringing those comets in.
Pluto.
And one of the lead authors of this study was Harold F. Levison, who noted that comets are essentially being handed off from planet to planet. And he called it a celestial bucket brigade. And if these 4 planets, the 4, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, were spread any further apart, then the comets could not be handed off as they are now. I mean, it turns out that each of the outer planets, like Neptune, will draw comets in from the Kuiper disk. Once they have passed within the zone of Neptune, Uranus can now begin to exert its influence and essentially draw them in, so they're now captured by this the gravitational force field of Saturn. Saturn will do the same thing and hand them off to Jupiter. Jupiter will then either throw them back out into the disk, into the depths of the great deep, or it will begin to vector them in towards the sun, where they become Earth crossing. So what's really interesting is that with the structure of our solar system being any different than it was, this whole process couldn't happen. So, when you begin to look at this thing, there becomes, it just becomes, it becomes hard to avoid the hypothesis, anyway, that there is design in the natural order. That our solar system is set up with a very unique set of parameters. And if you change these parameters, even in the slightest, the whole thing
collapses. Yeah, collapses completely.
Collapses, yes. Get rid of our moon. Boom, we're gone.
Oh, yeah,
Life
we're
is
gone. Yeah, we're gone. We're gone completely. And also Jupiter sucking in all of those celestial events that would have just pummeled this planet into dust. Right?
Right.
Think about that for a second. It's a trippy thing. So that's when you go to, is there a higher source? Is there something divine? Is there some intelligence to this? Is it beyond just mathematical odds that all of this just happened to happen? And you and I are allowed to speak on this radio station tonight because of just rolling the dice. It doesn't feel that way to me, Randall. It just doesn't, and I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, we're confronted with a mystery with a capital M. I look at some of the Native American traditions, and they refer to creation as the great mystery, and that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just completely awestruck by the whole system. How it came to be, listen, I'm clueless. What the ultimate source of it all is, I can't say. I don't know, other than the fact that it's stupid.
We know via our cosmic gardener that came to us. Phil, if you hear this, I'm sorry for calling you that, but man, I am so blessed to have come across you, dude. I'm so blessed for everybody that is muscled through my interrupting this presentation with my take on it. But guys, this just reaffirms how it all fits together. I love you all. Love, peace, chicken grease. Please let me know what you feel, how you feel about this in the comment section below. And if you haven't been following Phil and I's interviews, please look at it. Please do. With that, I bid you adieu. Be in the now. Do as you'd have undone, as you would have done to you. Do an act of kindness. Do it out of selfless, wanting nothing back behavior. It helps Love you.